The fifth sign that you're lying to yourself is this. Number 5, you ignore God's purposes for your life. You ignore God's purposes for your life. When you think about the story of Jeremiah, God had some funny ways of getting people's attention. God had asked Jeremiah at different times. He said, Jeremiah, go down to where the guy who makes pottery, go down to his house and watch what's going on. We talked about that story just a couple of weeks ago. He told different prophets different things. And so he told Jeremiah, go to your house, and I want you to go to your dresser, and I want you to go ahead and pull out a pair of your shorts that you wear underneath your clothes. Now, these are pajama shorts, just so you know. There's sharks on them, if you can see them okay. These are not my shorts. These are somebody else's shorts in my household that happens to be a male. I said, just grab a pair of shorts. These are the shorts that this other male in my house grabbed for me. And so God tells Jeremiah, he says, grab your shorts, and he says, take them, wad them up, and go shove them underneath a rock. He says, bury them and leave them there for a little while. And you can imagine what happens to a piece of clothing. It ends up getting wet, it ends up getting muddy, it ends up getting to a point where you can't wear it or use it anymore. And so if you look there in Jeremiah chapter 13, verse 10, look what happens. He says here, this wicked people who refuse, again, circle that word, refuse, to listen, circle the word listen, to my words. Whose words? To God's words. Who walk in the stubbornness, circle that word, stubbornness, of their hearts, and have followed other gods to serve them. We go on then to the rest of verse 10. He goes on then to say, and they bow down to these gods that they serve, these other gods. Let them be just like this undergarment, which is completely useless. And God has a purpose for your life. And God has a purpose for my life. And the challenge is this: when my heart becomes so hard and so stubborn that God can't get through to me, I lose my sense of purpose. When I get to the point where I get so distracted by things that just fill my life, where I have no margin, I have no time for God, that's when my life loses purpose. When I find myself that there are deep issues deep within me, things from my past, mindsets that I refuse to let go of, destructive habits that I refuse to take care of, that's when I lose my sense of purpose for God. Back when I was in my late high school years, about my senior year, up into my college, early freshman, sophomore year in college, I worked for a pool chemical company for a little while in the summers. So I went to the pool chemical company, and I remember my first day on the job, and they had warned me ahead of time, and they said, make sure that you wear a pair of Dickies work pants, because it's a polyester cotton blend. And if you wear cotton pants that are 100% cotton, they're not going to make it with the chemicals we're working with. And so did I listen to my boss? No, I didn't listen to my boss, because I didn't want to go spend money on a pair of pants that I was just wearing for a couple months there for the summertime. And so if you can kind of picture this with me, there's this big open, it's kind of like a junkyard, but instead of having trash, a garbage landfill there, there's just mounds and piles and piles of empty chlorine containers that you use for pool chemicals. So about 5-gallon containers. And so my job was to go ahead and take these 5-gallon containers, 4 at a time, put them on a conveyor belt, and they would come underneath a fill station that would fill up as fast as possible. In 4 to 5 seconds, fill those things with chlorine. And so these 4 fill heads, they would come down over top of those containers, and I was supposed to line the containers up so that the fill heads would go ahead, the nozzles, just kind of like if you're filling up a soda at a drink fountain, that they would fill up with this chlorine. And so the guy who's running the machine, he's on the other side of the conveyor belt, and he says, Manny, you ready? I said, I'm good to go. He said, are you sure? I am ready. And so we got the first 4 go through, got everything lined up. He hit the button. So we went through the first round. Second round, went through, lined everything up. You ready? He hit the button. Then he says, hey, I'm just going to put it on automatic. Are you ready to go? I am ready to run, man. We're good to go. And so we bring in the third batch. When they come through, the fill heads drop before I was ready. And because they weren't right on top of the holes to go into the containers, it hit the top of those barrels and shot right out at me. So all down the front of my shirt, down my pants. And they said, whoa, whoa, whoa. And they hit the stop button. Are you okay? And I had goggles on. I'm okay. I smelled like I just gotten out of a pool filled with chlorine. And they said, you okay? I said, yeah, I'm fine. And they said, do you have Dickies on? I said, no, I'm good. And they said, you better call home because you're going to need a pair of pants by this afternoon. I said, no, I'm fine. Well, sure enough, by the time I got to that afternoon, my pants didn't look like these shorts. I had holes that were eaten through. The chlorine was so strong, it actually ate through my clothes. And so I just looked like kind of like a bum, like a homeless guy, just wearing rags, basically, falling off of me. When I got home, my mom said, "What happened to you?" I said, "I didn't listen like I should have." So I got a pair of pants for the next day and was good to go. But if you've ever been in a situation like that where you say, "I'm okay, I know better," we find ourselves, we can get so far off track because we lose a sense of God's purpose for our lives. Here's the big question for us then. Self-deception, if it's so easy for us, we'll go ahead and put this big question up here for us on the screen. The big question is this: why am I so prone to self-deception? It happens to the best of us. And if we're not being honest, then we're deceiving ourselves. It's like saying, "Have you ever lied?" Well, no, I've never lied. Well, you're lying now, aren't you? The big problem for us is that we're so prone to self-deception. But here's the big question for us, but the big problem is this, and here's where Jeremiah comes in with this drop the mic comment, the statement that he has. And listen in to what he says. We'll go ahead and put this up. The big problem for us is this. Jeremiah 17:9, massive verse. The heart is deceitful. Go ahead and circle that word deceitful. Now your heart and my heart tends toward a permanent condition of deception. That instead of looking for people to go ahead and tell us the truth, we look for people to go ahead and confirm our bias. We're not looking to hear what's correct. We're looking to hear what's confirming us with our decision. And so we find, he says, now here's the deal. It goes further. He says, the heart's deceitful above all else, above what people say. We are more deceptive than what people would tell us. And he says this, and here's the difficult part, beyond cure. Go ahead and underline that phrase, beyond cure. Now imagine this. If you had a friend who lied to you out of 10 times, they lied to you once, what would your friendship be like? Would you let them off the hook? Yeah, you might. You might say, okay, listen, like, all right, we've all done it, and it's not for a it doesn't create a healthy relationship, but we've all been there. If your friend would lie to you 50% of the time, what kind of friendship would you have? If your friend lied to you 9 times out of 10, would you really be friends? No. And the challenge is this. He says here, the heart is deceitful above. Your heart, not 1 out of 10, not 5 times out of 10. Our heart, according to Jeremiah, 10 times out of 10, isn't honest with us. That is not good news. What's the answer, though, for us? Is there hope? Yes, there's hope. Here's the hope. The big answer for us is this. A permanent condition, the permanent condition of our heart is this. We tend towards self-deception. A permanent condition requires constant supervision. Those chlorine fillheads, they required constant supervision. I had to watch them all the time. Your heart requires constant supervision. Now, as we come down the home stretch then, as we wrap up here, there's 4 habits to cultivate honesty with yourself. There's 4 habits we're going to look at. We're going to find Solomon talks about this in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. We'll see this. Look on the screen. He says, guard your heart. That is, the word guard there is that concept of constant supervision. Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. Guard your heart. Why? Because our heart is very impressionable. And our heart then, it determines how we go in life. And if we're deceived by our heart, then we're going to take a deceptive course in life. Here's another way to put it. Another translation puts it this way. We'll go ahead and pull up this next one. Be very careful about what you think. Why? Because your thoughts, they run your life. What you think about, you feel in your heart, and from your heart, then to your hands. If you look in society, people are doing things in society that are crazy today. There are things being put before legislation, and there are things in the news where we say, why are people doing these things? Why are people acting out this way? Because at some point in their mind, they allowed them to be deceived by their heart, and their thinking was impacted by their heart, and so their thoughts now are running their life. Where you find our head ends up being impacted by our heart, and our heart impacts our hands, what we do. When we look there, then, here are the 4 habits then. Is it possible for us to have self-awareness. Here are 4 keys then, 4 habits to being self-aware, to being honest with ourselves. Number 1, admit. Admit that you're susceptible. Admit that you and I, that we are susceptible to being self-deceived. It's really tough. It's really, really hard. Because all of us want to think, you know what, I make really good decisions, and I'm really trustworthy. But here's the deal. In Jeremiah 3:13, we'll go ahead and look at this verse. Admit that you've done wrong. The very first key, the very first step, the very first habit for us to get healthy is to admit when we need help. Is to admit that things aren't going well. Is to admit, hey, I'm wrong. And Jeremiah says this to the different kings he's talking to. You just have to admit it. But what happened? They refused to admit that they were wrong. Number 2 is this. Ask yourself the integrity question. As we talked about last week, there's 5 different questions, and the first question to ask ourselves to make better decisions and have fewer regrets is this. Am I being honest with myself, really? Am I really being honest with myself? Now think about a purchase that you made. Why did I make this purchase? And then add to that little word, really. Like I'm double checking myself on this. Like, really, why did I make this decision? Now, if you're watching online, can you say, Pastor Matt, I've made some bad purchases before in the past? Go ahead and just put yes in the comment section for me. Yes, I've made some bad purchases in the past. We all have. My basement is a museum of bad purchases from my past, of things where people said, hey, I don't want this anymore. Can I go ahead and pass this off to you? And I'm learning. I am a recovering bad habit purchaser. I'm a recovering hoarder, if you will. Before Amanda and I got married, about 6 months, we were 6 months before getting married, and she was still in college, and I was working a job, and so we were worlds apart. She was on the West Coast, I was on the East Coast here in the Philadelphia area. And I can remember my first step, I had to find a house. I found my wife to be, and I had to find a place to live, and so anytime people said, hey, we've got furniture, I'd say, okay, I'll take it. Give me anything, give me everything. So I got all this different furniture from all these different people. So much stuff. I kind of probably furnished like 4 or 5 apartments. And I put it all in my parents' garage. And so a couple months before we were going to get married, Amanda came for a visit. And I was so excited. We were going to go look at different apartments. And so we went to my folks' house, and I pulled open the garage door. And it was kind of like Storage Wars. And I pulled open the garage door, and I said, ta-da! And she looked in there, and she started crying. Well, she didn't really cry, but she just kind of was like, oh, what is that? And I said, what's wrong? And she goes, well, there's like a stackable wash and dryer next to some other furniture that like none of it matched, and most of it was from like the 70s. So it was like the 70s show called, and they want all the furniture back. That was the furniture we had. And a lot of it smelled bad, like stuff that I had actually picked up off the curb that people were putting out. And I thought, hey, before it goes to the dump, one man's trash is another man's treasure, and it's going to furnish my house. So needless to say, I wasn't too wise, but I'm getting better at it. Understanding just because somebody offers their stuff to me doesn't mean I need to take it. And the problem is this. Do I really need to do this? Really? Why am I taking this step and making this decision? Really? Why am I angry? Really? Why did I stay longer? Really? Why did I leave early? Why am I moving out? Why did we move in together? Why did we get married? Really? Why am I so depressed? Really? Why am I discouraged? Really? Why do I want to quit my job? Why do I want to make this purchase? Really, honestly. We say that phrase, honest to God. Why am I wanting to do this? Honest before God. I have to check myself. Because your answer to those questions will reveal the motivation and the why behind what you want to do. And most often, our reasoning and our rationale will not hold up. It will not hold water. We find there Psalm 26, verse 2. We ask ourselves this question. He says, the psalmist David, put me on trial, Lord, and cross-examine me, test my motives and my heart. He says, God, check me. Here's a prayer that God will answer. If you ask God this, and you pray this prayer to God, and you say, God, reveal my true motives. Help me see. Help me not to be deceived. God will reveal that to you. It's funny because we'll pray prayers like, God, I need $1 million. Or God, I got this scratch off. Please just help me to make sure that my $10 didn't go to waste, right? We've all been there, all done that. We find ourselves, please, Lord, bring this to happen. And sometimes God answers those prayers, and sometimes he doesn't. But here's a prayer that he will answer 100% of the time. If you're dead honest with God, you say, God, why? Why do I have this mindset? Why am I making this decision? And God will examine, just like David says, God, you'll test me, test my motives, my heart. Number 3, the third habit is this: adopt a curiosity mindset. Adjust your heart toward humility. Adopt a curiosity mindset. Ask a question and ask another question. Here's the reality. You don't have to raise your hand, but you've ever been at this point where you get really excited? Hey, everybody, guess what? What? I'm really thinking about it a lot. Okay? And then you let your big idea fly. And then all of a sudden you see everybody's response on their face. And you're going, I don't think everybody's for me. And what often happens for us, it takes somebody with a lot of humility to say, hey, why don't you think this is a good idea? Most of us, if we don't feel a good reception from people, will say, hey, I'm not going to really talk about it. Or we'll go find somebody who says, hey, to any idea that we've ever had. And the challenge for us is this, is to keep asking ourselves and allow people to ask us questions. It's hard because sometimes we can feel like we're under the interrogation lamp. And they say, well, why? And our challenge is this, to keep a humble attitude, a humble heart. 2 Timothy, look at this verse, 3:14. Paul is encouraging his protege, Timothy. He says, continue in what you've learned. So continue to stay curious and what you found to be true. Because it's only after we pursue with curiosity and humility that we'll uncover truth. Even Jesus talked about this in John 8:32. Jesus says this, that when you know the truth will set you free. Not when you know your bias, not when you know your confirmation, not when you have your decisions confirmed by other people, but he says when you know the honest-to-goodness truth, that truth will give you the freedom to what? To make a good decision. We find then the fourth habit is this: agree. Agree that we need God's help. I need God's help. You need God's help. Agree that we need God's help. Psalm 55:16. I ask for your help, Lord God, and you will keep me safe. If you want to have fewer regrets and better decisions, ask God for help, and God will guide you. All throughout the Bible, Psalm 37 talks about that the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, of a good man, a good woman are ordered by God. And God delights in those steps that we take. And even though we mess up and we fail at times, that as we keep a humble heart and continue to accept God's help and ask God for help and agree we need God's help, that God will continue to help us to get back up on our feet. And so we find ourselves to agree and say, God, I need your help. The big question for us is this: am I being honest with myself, really? And that leads us then to this big decision. Decision number 1. We've got 5 questions and 5 decisions we're going to talk about over these few weeks. So the big decision for decision 1, the integrity decision, is this: I will not lie to myself, even when the truth makes me feel bad about myself. And why don't you circle that phrase, feel bad? We often don't like to hear the truth. Why? Because it makes us feel bad. But how much a preventive measure could we take if we'll take a little bit of pain for a moment than to live with the pain of regret for a lifetime? And so our encouragement is this. We find Job chapter 6 verse 25 talks about this as we come down to a close. Job 6 verse 25. How painful are honest words. They are painful. But what does your argument prove? And I can argue with myself, and you can argue with yourself. And we can try to prove our point, but it doesn't make the situation any better. What's the answer for us? Jesus tells a story in the New Testament. He talks about 4 different soils. He talks about a hard soil that when seeds are cast and when they land on that soil, that the seeds end up getting eaten by birds because the soil is hard. There's another soil that's filled with rocks and stones. And so the seed goes and it grows roots and it doesn't grow up very far because it can't get past those stones. And then there's another seed that falls on soil that has weeds that grow up and it gets choked out by those other weeds. But then there's a seed that falls on soil that's soft soil, that there's no stones and there's no weeds there to compete with it. And it finds root there and it begins to grow. In Luke chapter 8, verse 15, Jesus talks about this, and he says in Luke chapter 8, verse 15, do we have that verse? Can we pull that up there for us? The seeds that are planted on good ground are people who hear the word. Go ahead and underline that phrase, hear the word. They listen. And they don't just hear it, but they keep it in their good and honest hearts. Go ahead and underline those words, good and honest hearts. And what happens? They produce something that's good despite what life may bring. How often do we make decisions because of circumstances around us, where the circumstances don't look bad, and so we find ourselves saying, I got to, I have to, but we're not being honest with ourselves, really, truly honest with ourselves. When we have a heart that's soft and tender toward God, when we allow God's word, when we allow God's truth, and Jesus said, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free, to go ahead and take root in our hearts, it'll produce something good despite what situations bring around us. Because here's the deal. As we go through this, we're going to continue to talk about the decisions we make and how important they are. Because at the end of the day, here's our last statement is this. At the end of the day, every decision that I make today is a story I will tell one day. The decisions that you make today will either be regrets in the future, or there'll be great stories that you can tell people to say, you know what, to tell your kids, tell your friends, to tell people and say, you know what, it was tough and it was hard in the moment. I didn't feel like anybody was watching. I didn't feel like anybody knew or anybody cared. But I made the decision in the moment because of the story I wanted to tell one day. A story not of regret, but a story of rejoicing. A story that's worth the living and worth the telling. Let's pray.